And I'm kicking it off. It is the third Wednesday of the month. Welcome, everybody, to the Kubernetes office hours. This is a monthly live stream where we hop on YouTube with some Kubernetes experts, and then you all join hash office hours on Slack, and then ask your questions, and we will try to answer as many of them as we can. So before we get started here, let's do some quick introductions. Let's go Ralph, Jesse, Josh, Dims. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you work, and maybe your area of expertise, what you've been doing in Kubernetes.
Hi, my name's Ralph Banks, and I work as a CRE at Heptio, and my area of expertise is fixing problematic clusters and networking.
Hi, I'm Jesse Hamilton. I'm a CRE at Heptio, and my typical specialty is storage and DRBC.
Hi, I'm Josh Burkus. I'm on the Kubernetes release team, and I also work for Red Hat. So the two things that I know a fair amount about are stateful sets and OpenShift.
Hi, my nickname is Dims. I work for Huawei. I do a little bit of SIG testing, some SIG release work in Kubernetes, and I mainly work on the intersection between OpenStack and Kubernetes and how to make things work better together.
All right, sorry about that. And Ben the Elder is trying to join us, but he's having some laptop problems. So unfortunately, he might or might not be able to join. But lastly, I'm George Castro. I work at Heptio as a community manager, and I kind of help wrangle these. We have these sessions that we do once a month. Thanks very much, all the panelists, for showing up to contribute. Before we start, just some new ground rules. Remember, the channel is a no judgment zone. Please obey the Kubernetes Code of Conduct. And while this panel of experts is pretty good, we actually don't have access to your cluster. So there might be situations where we really can't help you, because we might not have the information about your environment, and things get complicated and distributed systems are hard. So in those cases, we'll do our very best at least to point you into documentation or a place where you can start to at least debug your problem and then hopefully help you narrow down what the problem is. Panelists, you're definitely encouraged to not just answer a question with a link to the docs or whatever, but maybe share some of your production expertise or any story that might help somebody that's trying to use the technology. And with that, looks like Ben got his Zoom figured out. Ben, we were just finishing with our introductions. Feel free to just introduce yourself, and then we'll get started as people ask questions in hash office hours. We've got a bunch of questions lined up already. Thank you, those of you that are submitting. So Ben, who are you?
Hey, I'm Ben. I work on the test infra tooling, mostly some other test tooling, contributor experience stuff a little bit, and a tiny bit of internal things here at Google with GKE.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and actually the very first question is for you, because this morning we did get a GKE question and a bunch of us were stumped. So I'm going to go ahead and post it in the channel real quick, just as a post. And just to repeat it here for everyone, please keep in mind that there is about a 10-second delay between the Slack channel and our live stream. So the question is, this might be more of a GCP GKE question, but does anyone know which GKE permission, if any, controls a user's access to create certain CRD resources that fall under certain APIs? I'm guessing container.custom-resource-definitions.create allows users to create custom resource definition objects, but I'm after controlling permissions to create something like API version, cert manager. You can read the YAML there on the channel. Sorry, so if you could help us with that. And while you're thinking about that, we actually discovered earlier today that just about all the cloud providers have a channel on the Slack, the Kubernetes Slack. So if you're looking for provider-specific stuff, that was basically the answer we came up with this morning was, hey, check out #GKE. But there are channels available for other providers as well.
So I believe most RBAC things are done through RBAC. You can set up users with the identity integration, but if you want to set what their RBAC roles are, use normal Kubernetes RBAC. I do remember seeing, and I'm trying to pull up, there was a recent launch coming out for integrating Google groups with RBAC, which might be helpful. But generally speaking, I think with pretty much all providers, if you want to set up RBAC rules for especially like a custom Kubernetes resource, you just use Kubernetes RBAC.
Okay. He goes on to ask, is this possible with just GCP IAM policies, or do I need to do stuff to create RBAC in the cluster and link to the GCP IAM accounts?
I believe the answer for that is that you do need to do RBAC in the cluster, not just GCP IAM. However, I am not an expert on this. I have worked with this not quite that extensively.
Okay. And this person was from this morning, and they were able to find that GKE channel. So that's mostly kind of saying if you happen to know off the bat. Okay, moving on. Those of you just joining us, we are answering questions live for the next hour in #office-hours and on the YouTube channel. Basically, keep asking your questions. I'll read them off to the panel, and then we will continue to go. Let's see. Next question. Srampel asks, question for the office hours. Can you provide pros and cons of authenticated webhook-based approach compared to OIDC? Did I get that right? Connect-based authentication approach. Is the OIDC option always better if available, or is the authentication webhook better in some scenarios?
Okay, I'll take a stab.
Sure.
So the OIDC one, that's the easiest place to start, I think. The OIDC integration should work off the box, out of the box. So that's where you would start. And then if you have any additional things that you would like to do, then you write custom webhooks. And custom webhooks are always useful when you're integrating with things that are not already there in the box, so to say. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, and if not, users, feel free to always ask a follow-up question if you have any clarifying information or anything like that. Feel free to either post a follow-up, or we've done the whole we'll wait for you while you type furiously thing. So, all right, moving on. Srampel, let us know if we can, if you have a follow-up to that. Jim Angel, welcome to Office Hours, asks, I would like some feedback on anyone currently using a service mesh in production. What challenges have you faced? Can you share your most painful learning experience with implementing it? What control plane / data plane did you choose, and why? Oh boy, this was going to be complicated. Any feedback on this?
I've only ever worked with folks, not any production service mesh items. It's always been proof of concept clusters and test clusters to see if it was feasible.
Yeah.
Usually Istio, to be honest, with the ones that I've worked with. And a lot of it was getting all of the endpoints to talk as expected based on how everything was open in the past. And they had locked everything down.
Yeah, I feel like I know a lot of people that are playing with service meshes. I haven't yet sat down at a conference and heard a talk on how people are doing this in production. Does anybody have a alternative opinion about that? All right. Hopefully that helps answer your question, Jim. Sorry, we can't give you a lot more detail there. Srampel asks, SIG cluster lifecycle future direction. Is it expected that there will usually be a custom cluster management application running on top of the cluster API? Or is it expected / recommended direction going that the customers directly use the cluster API to specify clusters to be created along with CRDs for non-standard enhancements? What does the SIG feel to be more recommended reference model? I've not attended a SIG cluster lifecycle meeting in a while.
I can attempt.
Yes.
So the main reason for the cluster API is because we have a diverse set of tools like kops, Kubernetes Anywhere, and things like that, where we feel that the things are fractured. So just like, there were a lot of install tools before KubeADM, and we kind of like got everybody to start using KubeADM, even if they present another UX. Internally, they should use KubeADM, right? Even Minikube uses KubeADM now. So similar to that, we want to have something that people can rely on, and it will work in the same fashion across the different cloud platforms. That's the reason for doing the cluster API. Yes, once we do the API, we will be providing the CLI tools as well. So you can use the CLI tools and do whatever you need to do, or you can write a custom cluster management application too if you want. So, but the idea is that we will end up using kops and Kubernetes anywhere and other things like that to switch to cluster API. So essentially, the management tools will use cluster API and then KubeADM underneath the covers on each of the nodes. That's the kind of situation where we want to end up with.
So will tools, sorry, I have a follow-up question. So will tools then expected to be consuming both kubeadmin and the cluster API in the same tool? Is that how?
Yeah, they could, depending on what they're trying to do. Yes.
Sure. Okay. Good.
Just to start with, in SIG testing, we want to, we are constantly running into problems with some of the tools that are not fully maintained. So like Kubernetes Anywhere, for example, right? So that is where we would like to start first, saying, okay, we want to switch over from Kubernetes Anywhere to the cluster API and use cluster API with both AWS and GCGKE, and then prove that this is possible and this works fine for our use case, and then kind of like expand from there. So currently there's OpenStack, I guess AWS folks are there, GCGKE stuff. There's a lot of people working on cluster API for different cloud providers. So I think it's an exciting time to join and help out too.
Awesome. And Ralph or someone, can you snag the cluster API working group link to their SIG meetings and toss it in Slack so people have it? That would be awesome. Brian, I see you've joined. Are you going to help answer questions or just hanging out?
Oh, I'm just hanging out. Thanks. I haven't actually been to one of these before, and I'm super excited about what's going on, and I'm not stuck in a cube somewhere, so I thought this would be a great time to join.
Awesome. Welcome. Moving on to our next question from Tim W. asks, I've inherited a kops managed cluster on version 1.7 running on AWS. I'd like to upgrade to the latest versions, but I'm a bit shy of just running the standard upgrade commands untested in production. I hear you. Is there a proper way to handle these type of updates? Should I be cloning the entire cluster in order to test upgrades? We have 10 to 15 main interconnected services. What kind of strategies should I be looking towards? Great question, Tim. And Ralph, I believe in prep, you had an answer-ish to this.
Josh was also
let me bring up to date on what's already been discussed in Slack on Tim's
Sure,
question.
absolutely.
So in Slack, we already discussed in Tim's question that he can actually create a second staging cluster using the current cop spec, which is a good idea as a start.
Okay, so this is actually the second upgrade question we've had today. The first one was, I don't think it was cops, it was something else. I'm starting to think, and this is a loaded question I'm asking on purpose. It's starting to look like to me that the default upgrade path is always spawn a new cluster, move your stuff over, kill the old. Is it too early to call the whole upgrade?
I was not suggesting spawning a new cluster necessarily as a way of performing the upgrade. It's
okay.
This is not his cluster. He didn't set it up originally.
Sure.
And so he doesn't even know at this stage whether the cluster operates strictly according to the cop spec file, or whether it was deployed with cops and then somebody modified it.
Okay.
Whether it's been tweaked. So doing an exercise like deploying a staging cluster using a slightly modified version of that cop spec, and then trying to deploy those apps in a staging configuration to that staging cluster will tell him a lot about what the actual state of the production cluster is.
Right, because you would be able to basically see the diff between your two clusters. I see Ralph nodding profusely, so I think he agrees with you violently.
Yep. You also want to, if he's
Oh, and he just froze for me.
they'll also want to do some load testing. Let me cut off my video.
Okay.
You'll also want to load test those applications on the staging cluster, just to make sure you don't see any weird behavior in an upgrade version. I've seen that before. When you do an upgrade on a COPS cluster, it does give you a very nice printout of everything that is going to be upgraded to the next version. So you'll want to roll 1.8 to the next one. And you'll want to do that on the staging cluster once you have it cloned basically exactly with some staging apps in place.
So he's actually upgrading already. The production cluster is running on 1.7. So he's going to have to upgrade it 3 or 4 versions. And anything special about that? Anything you know about COPS for 1.7 that's going to require extra manual intervention?
Not that I'm aware of. It should be pretty easy. The upgrade flag actually, before you perform the upgrade, which I would definitely suggest doing on the staging cluster, it does tell you everything that's going to be up before it goes through and does the upgrade itself. So there's a verify flag before you actually go through.
Okay, you cut out a bit, Ralph. I think you might just want to kill your video for the rest of the session. But he did say something that makes me want to ask again, because I noticed a little smile out of Dim's in the corner of my eye. I saw Dim's smile. 4 in-place upgrades? Or kind of new cluster? I'm purposely asking this controversial question.
Yeah. So in our SIG testing, we do have upgrade jobs, but the upgrade jobs are specific to certain tools that we have, right? So, and we cannot always, I mean, different tools do different things. So we can't tell for sure whether, what you have will actually do the upgrades in a proper fashion, like HCD, changing the HCD versions, doing the pulling all the stuff in from the older versions of HDD, from HCD2 to HCD3, things like that. So it's hard to tell. But then we've always had this problem with, suppose I have a really big cluster, then I can't really recreate a full new cluster, right? So yeah, that's definitely something we need to work on better as a community. How do we support like 5,000 node clusters? How do we make sure that upgrades work seamlessly? And also skip upgrades is another hot topic. How can I go? We just talked about like they have to upgrade 4 versions, right? So how do we go from 1.8 to 1.10 because I have some time now to do an upgrade, but then something else is coming, so I can't upgrade for another year.
Yeah.
So, that kind of, we always say, okay, go from 1.8 to 1.9, 1.9 to 1.10, but then you need to add stuff for skip level upgrades too.
Right, because if it's COPS with 1.7.11, I'm pretty sure that COPS back then was still on etcd2, right? So we know at least there will be a major etcd upgrade.
Right.
That's just in my head. I was like,
Yeah, there's going to be a migration involved there. Yeah.
So, I would add for the actual for SIG testing, like for like the tooling that we run to do the testing, which also runs on clusters, we would prefer everywhere possible to just use new clusters. It also helps you guarantee that like what's running is actually from your config. But we do have that same problem where when you have a large cluster, it's kind of disruptive to say, well, we're just going to delete this cluster and make a new one or something. So we have a cluster that's been upgraded on GKE so long that we don't actually have RBAC in it. So as the part of the CNCF migration, we're going to finally do some of those things, but we expect it to be pretty disruptive. So yeah, for large clusters, in-place upgrades can go pretty smoothly, but you might want to try to test that somewhere.
course, one of my favorite features of the managed cloud services, of course, is automatic upgrades. Okay, Tim, I hope that answers your question. If you are doing this, we do encourage you to blog about it. Let the community know. I'll be very interested in how people do this, what precautions you take, that kind of stuff. So hopefully that gets you going in the right direction. As always, anyone, please feel free to ask follow-up questions, even if it's not your question. That's kind of how I learn as well. Srample asks, looking for some recommended network policy recipes / models for providing a secure by default cluster that has some level of isolation and protection between the control plane namespaces such as kube-system and general application namespaces, and maybe some extra day-n services namespaces that are running, monitoring services for apps, for examples. Anyone know of a good recommended design / recipes? This is a slightly open-ended question. Happy to chat offline with anyone more specific details. So this sounds like RBAC and namespaces. So who wants to tackle this one?
Yeah, this one we'll have to take offline. There is a security. I remember a lot of URLs being posted there. So if you go right now to SIG security and go through the things, you will see a few things being talked about with URLs and pointers to different resources. I don't know any off the top of my head, but you know, while we are talking, I'll throw some links out if I see them.
Okay. Ralph, any opinions on this one?
Sorry, I got cut off. I moved locations. My Wi-Fi was being special. Is this the network policies one?
Yeah.
I put a link in channel to the one that I use to base most things off of. It's a pretty good starting point with really nice looking examples and markdown documents.
Okay.
To give you a place to start, and then you've got to kind of tweak based on your namespaces and things like that. But it has some recipes that are pretty useful.
Okay, and that is github.com/AmitB Kubernetes -network -policy -recipes. That's in the channel. Hopefully that'll give you something to steal and get started. Dylan has 4 questions, so we're going to try to power through these. All right, Dylan asks, in EKS, should I stick with the default max pods as defined in the CloudFormation template? If not, how would I determine a better value? I don't know how familiar the panel is with EKS. Anyone want to take a stab at this one?
Right. It depends, because those max pods are, if you're using the AWS VPC CNI, are actually based on how many IP addresses you can add to each elastic network interface, which is limited by the size of the instances you're running.
And then the follow-up question to that, is there a default number of system pods I can expect on a new node? Does max pods take those system pods into account?
I don't believe it takes them into account. It's just all nodes, all pods that get scheduled to a node. So it's not going to include any DNS that gets added based on your replica sets. And then I don't believe the CNI has a pod that lives because it's actually running kind of in a special way that attaches every pod to a VPC IP address.
And this next one, he's asking, he or she's asking about EC2 instance types, but I want to generalize this just in general because we do get this question quite a lot. What is a good general purpose process for choosing an instance type for nodes? Having a problem where jobs that take 5 seconds on a Mac Pro locally will take over a minute on a pod. Huge bottlenecks are the load time when Python is importing the pandas library and delays in S3 handshakes. And he's using the Alpine Python 3 Docker image. Not sure if this is more of a case config thing or an Alpine issue. But we do get this question a lot where it's like, how exactly am I figuring out how to size my node here? Does anyone have any general tips in this case? An answer that isn't the biggest one you could afford would be great. Because we know.
So, I mean, you can always play with system requests and limits and things like that but basically you start with something that you can monitor the CPU and the memory, right? So you start there, Prometheus and things like that are there. So, and then you figure out how many of these do you want to fit into a pod, right? That will give you a rough estimate of the size that you need. Plus, you need the typical overhead for things that are running in the kubelet itself, like daemon sets, kubelet, and things like that. So there is no hard and fast rule as such, but then you have to measure and then tweak. There is no magic formula, I think.
Sure. And that kind of leads to his next follow-up question, which is a question we also hear. Our setup has worker pods pulling jobs off a Redis queue. New jobs are added every minute. Goal is to keep the queue at 0. How to manage scaling the pods versus the nodes? I assume it's always best to add workers to the max pods limit and just scale the nodes. Are there instances where I would not want to have max pods be the number of workers? So I think what he's trying to get at is like, how do I figure out, am I adding more bigger pods? Am I trying to pack more pods? I'm sorry, nodes. Am I trying to pack more pods in a node? Or do I make bigger nodes with less amount of pods? It feels like the kind of eternal admin question there. Do we have any general guidelines in that? And he adds in Slack, like what would I measure and what would I tweak in this case?
Are you reading off of the office hours Slack channel?
Yeah, I actually have the notes here in hackmd.io, and filling us in in Slack. But if we want some time to digest this one, I have a few other questions that we can go while you try to figure this one out. I can go either way.
Well, I'm expecting that they're using the autoscaler to do this. So, typically the time taken to start a new node, you have to take that into factor as well. So scaling up and down of pods is something that you can do, but then it depends on, well, again, you got to do the measuring thing, right? So you start with trying to fit more things into a pod, and when you can't fit into a pod, then use the autoscaler to add a new node, and vice versa to tear the new node when the thing goes down. And again, there is no magic answer there other than be sure to measure the time that is taken to spawn a new node, and factor that into account when you are trying to do the math for trying to keep the queue at 0.
And then, of course, when you say measuring, you would also measure the service itself, right?
Right. How much time does it take for each of those items from the queue? All right. How many pods do you have? How many items do you expect? Say per minute or per hour, and what is the granularity that you want to go for? That's the kind of thing I would want them to factor into the equation when they are trying to figure out.
Okay, so hopefully that'll give you an idea of a place to start, Dylan. Please continue to post on the channel if you have follow-up questions. It looks like Ralph is also doing the text-only follow-up. So thanks, Ralph, for doing that. Moving on to 2 more questions here. FDO XYZ says, hello, not sure if it's a valid question since I'm quite new to Kubernetes admin. What's your general stance on the EFK stack add-on that lives inside the official repo? Is it a good template to personalize, or should I try rolling out something else? I hear it's still been maintained, but I also think the add-ons are no longer officially supported to the project as they are before. And then here's the GitHub URL to what he or she is talking about here. And I will toss that in the channel.
I apologize. I've got to bounce. I've got double booked, but feel free to ping me on Slack if you have any questions you think I might know about. I am Ben the Elder at.
All right. Thanks for joining us, Ben.
Have a
And
great one,
hopefully
guys.
we'll see you. Thanks for your help.
Anybody else wants to take this?
So what is actually, now that he leaves, I was about to ask, what's the status of things in the cluster subdirectory?
So in general, we are trying to take things out of the main Kubernetes repository, right? So
Right.
It was a good effort. Samples that get into these add-ons, so you can use them as a starting point. But then, yes, please contribute back as well. But it's mostly people trying to do something and they got it working, so they said, okay, maybe it's a good idea for maintaining it in the main Kubernetes repository. But then we are going in the opposite direction now, where we are proposing people take things out of the main Kubernetes repository and maintain that in their own little repositories, because getting review cycles is hard and things like that. So some of these are not maintained because people have moved on to other things. So yeah, take what you can, see if you can make it work, and we would appreciate it if you start a new repository to take care of things.
So it does look like it was committed to 21 days ago by NeoLit123, who's actually always active on Slack as far as I can tell. This sounds like something like I personally, actually, he looks like he's been maintaining this for at least a year. I would just ping him on Slack and be like, hey, are you moving this thing? Is it going anywhere? Because I know a lot of these examples and stuff are getting pushed out, and that's probably where I would start. Although be careful, you might end up maintaining it. That was a joke. It's fine. All right. So any other comments on this one? This one seems pretty straightforward. So thanks, FDO XYZ. Those of you that were answering questions, we're a little bit over halfway done, and stick to the end so you can be entered in the raffle, and I will give you a Kubernetes t-shirt that we always forget to wear during the actual show. Moving on, Ali I asks, any recommendations on tools for keeping your Kubernetes clusters in sync with your Git repo? So far, I've come across Flux, which we've discussed in office hours in the past. Any other opinions here on GitOps tools? Or in the channel as well, if you have them.
Yeah, well, there's always OpenShift's source to image, which I believe there's a version of that runs with standard Kubernetes, is another GitOps tool.
And if you could paste the URL to that in the channel, that would be slick.
Awesome. Will do.
Any other opinions?
There was one more. I think it was called GitCube from Hasura. I'll throw that into the channel too.
Yeah. Okay, and with that, we're waiting for more questions from the channel. Let's see what's going on in Kubernetes-users, which always has questions. Let me go ahead and taking more questions in hash office hours. If you want to join. Hopefully I'm not overly spamming on this day. And there's the source to image link. So while we're waiting for more questions with the delay there, what are y'all looking forward to in this next version of Kubernetes? I know we have a release coming up. What wakes you up in the morning, Dims?
Oh, I'm excited about doing things on other architectures other than Intel. We did a lot of work trying to get images. The images that we use typically have a suffix saying AMD 64 or ARM, right? So typically when you write a YAML file, then the image is very specific to the architecture. So for example, kubeproxy, if you have a YAML for a kubeproxy, you will see that the kubeproxy has a suffix in the image name. So we've gone to through a lot of effort to make sure that we are going to publish images that do not need the suffix, and using, for example, there is a pause image, right? Take the pause image, for example. So there was a pause AMD64 and a pause ARM. So now if you just say pause, that is enough to give you the image that will work on all architectures. So we actually switched all the test images that is used in our test infrastructure for conformance testing to be images of this kind. We have like 20, 30 images like that that we had to modify, add manifests, so they would work on different architectures. So this is something that will really help, I think. So the first step is to make sure that the same things that you use for Intel architecture will work on ARM, right? So full ARM cluster will work off of the same YAML files that you had for your Intel architecture. So then we would, after that, in 1.13, we'll start experimenting more with mixed clusters, where you will have the master might be on Intel, but then you will have Power nodes or S390 nodes or things like that. So the IBM team from Power did a really good job in trying to switch all the images out. And a big shout out to Lucas, who started this about 2.5 to 3 years back, and it's finally seeing the light of the day. So yeah, that's something that I'm excited about.
Yeah, so officially that gives us AMD 64 / Intel 64. What do they call it? They have some other name that is an AMD 64. ARM 64, S390, PowerPC, Little Indian.
Mm-hmm.
Am I missing one? Not old, not big Indian Power, right?
Yeah, the ARM has a couple of versions, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, those are the major 4 ones.
Sure.
So what we would request people to kick the tires and let us know, try things on different architectures and see where we go from there.
Sure. And just a reminder, there is a hash ARM channel on the Kubernetes Slack that has a lot of really ARM smart people. Those of you experimenting with your little Kubernetes clusters on your Raspberry Pis at home. All right, Josh, what are you liking in the next release? We are still taking questions, by the way, in the channel. I'm just filling in the time with smart people.
Yeah. The nice thing about being in my rotation of being off the release team this time is I'm actually kind of blissfully unaware of what's in the current release. Something that won't last at 1.13 because I'll be back on the team.
Yeah. What so just a curious follow-up then. What's involved after you make a release? Obviously, we just don't abandon it.
No.
So what's the TLDR then on like the point releases? Does your release?
What happens with the point releases is we have a release team role called patch.
Okay.
And when we do the actual release, after the day of the actual release and after the post-mortem, then the release lead steps down and that person takes over. The current one for 111 is Foxish on Slack. I'm blanking on what his real name is.
Anirudh.
So he's in charge of updates and point releases and that sort of thing. The patch release manager is actually a very important role. And if you're interested in being on the release team, but you need to limit your time commitment in a way that doesn't allow you to be super distracted for the last 4 weeks of the release cycle, it's something people should take a look at.
Mm-hmm.
Because the point dot releases are a little bit more predictable.
Right. Someone mentioned that the ARM channel isn't that busy. I think it depends if Ed from Packet is around or not.
That's right.
Yeah. So Ed's local to me, and Packet does some really good ARM stuff. I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, Ralph, anything you're looking forward to in this release? Well, before we get to Brian Topping's next question.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to new updated and validated versions of Docker and CRI integrations.
Okay.
Containerd, CRIO, and new versions of Docker.
On that front, if somebody can help us kick the tires on 1806 Docker, we would be it would be really helpful. We cut a RC1 release today, so please, kick the tires and let us know. If you have trouble, you can find us on SIG release channel, and we'll escalate it to the right place.
So that brings up a beginner question I hear a lot, Dims, so I'm going to go ahead and just spam you with it. I noticed in our repo, when you add it to your operating system or whatever, we do have a bundled Docker that we test with there. But Docker upstream is, doing their releases and stuff. Do we have any best practices? Like, I know that the latest release that we test and we guarantee on is the one that's in the app repo. But I've also heard people say, well, we use the upstream one and it kind of just works. How is that playing out, other than I know what Josh's answer is going to be, so because he's just going to tell us to use cryo, right?
I'll let Josh go first, and then I'll
yeah.
too much.
Right, it does simplify your life.
Yeah.
At least all the installers support it, which is unfortunately not true yet.
Okay, I can take that. So this is the I think the last release we didn't update the Docker version, but the one before we did. So it's just a balance of trying to figure out, can we add one more Docker version and take an old Docker version out? So this time we saw that we had like 5 Docker versions in the test grid. So we kind of like, okay, take one out and add another one. And that was the kind of thing that we ended up doing in the last week or so. And thankfully, we haven't seen anything yet. We had one bug, which we quickly fixed. But then, we need to test more.
Yep. And Jim Angel kind of has a follow-up question. Is 1806 officially supported in 1.12 as a release note?
Yes, we will be publishing 1806 both in the release note and in Kubedium. Kubedium will support it, yes.
Okay, good to know. That's a great question, Jim. Thanks for that. I'm taking down everyone's questions for the t-shirt raffle, which we'll have in a few minutes here. Brian is asking, and we had this question this morning. Generally speaking, how do you all build and run your home clusters? Kubeadmin, bare metal, anything? Intentionally vague and open question. This is actually an interesting question because we get this one a lot. We had a question this morning with someone having a problem with Minikube, and then someone said, "Wait, that's why I use Kubeadmin, because it kind of gives me a real thing." And then someone's like, "But Minikube's moving to Kubeadmin." So just kind of curious. I know a lot of this is personal taste because developers have their favorite tools. So just quick survey how you run your clusters. Just spawning a bunch on a managed cloud server does not count as an answer. So
yeah, I have a bare metal machine right at the back. You can see it, the black one. So I use that one, and I also use VMs in various OpenStack clouds to do something as well.
Yeah, and I have a micro cluster of little x86 boards, which is one of my primary test platforms, and for that, I tend to either use Kubeadmin if I'm testing current Kubernetes, or OpenShift Ansible if I'm testing OpenShift. And when I'm deploying stuff in the cloud, sometimes I use Kubeadmin, sometimes I use KubeSpray.
Okay. Ralph, what do you like?
Usually, unless I'm testing a specific customer's requirement for an installer that they're currently using, I tend to go with Kubeadmin, just because it works pretty much everywhere. Or I'll use AWS Quick Start from Heptio just because it's quick and easy if I need something in AWS specifically.
Jesse, any opinions here?
About the same as Ralph. With working with customers, you obviously have to, follow the deployment or bootstrapping tool that they're using. But on my own Kubeadmin, just like Ralph said, it works a lot better for me in a bare metal situation in a home lab, and it's where I cut my teeth, and it's what I like to like to keep using.
And Brian, do you have an opinion?
I was actually asking that question.
Yeah, I know. That's why it was.
Oh yeah. No, I can chime in. I didn't
Yeah.
I didn't really understand the format of all this, so I didn't want to be
It's-
all like showing my camera, and I thought, oh man, I just got in the wrong thing. So no, I've been using Kubernetes and I like it a lot. I guess what I'm trying to get to is because I don't like using SaaS stuff. I don't like paying the money. So I've got a stack of hardware I bought off of eBay, and it's literally some in the colo and stuff like that. So I've been using Metal LB and going with I guess really and Kubernetes to start with. But I guess the thing that's challenging is really getting to that first deployment where you're sitting there saying like, wow, everything's running and I'm deploying stuff and it's working. So that's kind of sometimes it's a little harder, and you start thinking, man, maybe I'm not doing it right. Maybe I'm using the wrong key piece here. And I think what it maybe comes down to is it's just there's a lot of stuff going on. So.
Yep. And we just had, and for myself, I have an Intel NUC. It's a great little machine, Kubeadmin and bare metal. Richard Brown over at SUSE recently integrated Kubeadmin into their distro and used Cryo, and I told them I would try it this cycle, and so far it's been pretty good stuff. All right, so let's look. Srample asks, hey, I wasn't able to join live. Did my questions get answered? Don't worry, we have all of these on YouTube, and there's an entire archive and playlist. You can literally watch hours and hours of us just answering questions. Rope Try asks, what is the best way to deploy on-premise? We got time for maybe 2-3 more questions. What's the best way to deploy on-premise a pod with 2 Radius replicas and expose them to the corporate network with DNS records, if possible, on the main corporate DNS server? Thanks. That last bit sounds hard-ish to me. Any opinions here?
DNS records. Let's start from that because I don't know, how to start from the other end. So DNS records, I think there is a external DNS project which can help you with integrating with your corporate DNS servers. Let me find the URL. It has a bunch of integrations with non-traditional as well, and you can probably write your own plugin too if it comes to that. I don't know the answer to the rest of the question.
Okay, so we are running short on time, so hopefully you will get the URL, and that will get you at least started, and you can come back next session, hopefully, and have a follow-up if you need any help. And then the last question is going to go to Madi.Cruz, who says, what's the best practice to deploy a HA Kubernetes cluster bare metal on-premise? I get the feeling the answer is going to be the same thing that we did last time. Although one thing I have learned is HA is such a loaded term, because when I actually went in and looked at the specification that the Kubeadmin folks wrote up on how they're going to support HA and stuff, not HA, depending on who you ask, seems a little bit too general of a term. But opinions here.
I pasted the official docs for high availability using Kubeadium. I hope that'll be the start, but then you have to see if that is enough for you and kick the tires, I guess.
Yep.
The other thing I'll say is if you're not doing Kubeadium, because right now it only provides one configuration option, there's actually 2 degrees of Kubernetes HA. One is where you make just the etcd backing store HA, and the other one is where you actually have running failover nodes for the single pod services, like controller. So one of them is, the second one is fully automated HA, and that's what's described for the Kubernetes setup. And the second is partly manual HA. Part of it is you look at what is it you actually need in terms of those configurations. If you lose the physical master node, when does it need to be running again?
Okay. Any other comments on HA? All right, before we get to the raffle, just a quick outro here. Thanks to our panel anyway for volunteering. This is a volunteer event, so if you're deploying Kubernetes at work or something and you feel like you want to give back to the community, it's an hour a month. It's kind of laid back. You can show up as long as we have enough people to have a panel. You don't have to show up every single time, but it is a lot of fun. I'd like to thank the following companies who have donated engineering time to this, however. So thanks to Giant Swarm, Heptio, StockX, Packet.net, Pusher.com, Red Hat, Weaveworks, VMware, Zing, Huawei, and the University of Michigan. These organizations have volunteered their engineers to help us out, so give them a thumbs up if you would. And we are ready for the raffle. So I am rolling, and the number is actually Monty Cruz, the very last person to join. You won a Kubernetes t-shirt. Stick around. I will PM you and give you a code for the CNCF store. And with that, thanks very much, everyone, for joining us today. We are going to sign off, and we will see everyone again third Wednesday of every month. Thank you very much, panel. Any last comments?
Thanks for running the show, Jorge.
No worries,
George.
All right, thanks everybody for joining, and we'll good luck with your deployments. Thanks.